The morning sun cast long shadows across Whitman Air Force Base as Captain Sarah Mitchell limped toward the medical evaluation building. Her right leg dragged slightly with each step, a permanent reminder of the day her F-16 Fighting Falcon had gone down in flames over the Nevada desert. The crash had been 8 months ago, but the whispers still followed her down every corridor, through every briefing room, past every group of pilots who fell silent when she approached. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Broken bird, they called her behind her back. Damaged goods. Some were crueler. Flight risk. The words cut deeper than any physical wound, but Sarah had learned to carry them like stones in her pocket, heavy, constant, but somehow grounding. Medical buildings' automatic doors hissed open, and she stepped into the sterile coolness of fluorescent lighting and antiseptic air. Her appointment was routine now, part of the endless cycle of evaluations that determined whether she would ever fly again. The doctors spoke in measured tones about nerve damage, about reaction times, about the psychological impact of trauma. They never said what everyone already knew, that her career as a fighter pilot was over, but Sarah Mitchell had never been one to accept what everyone else knew to be true. The crash had happened on a Tuesday. Sarah remembered that detail with crystal clarity, though so much else from that day remained fragmented, like pieces of a shattered mirror reflecting disconnected images. She had been leading a routine training exercise over the Nellis Range. 4 F-16s in formation when the engine failure occurred. Not a catastrophic explosion, but a subtle loss of power that escalated into full system failure within seconds. The investigation report was thorough, clinical, and damning. Pilot error, it concluded. Failure to follow emergency procedures. Inadequate response to engine malfunction. The words were stamped in official letterhead, filed in triplicate, and became the foundation of her new reputation. Sarah had read the report dozens of times, each word etched into her memory like a scar, but she knew what the report didn't say. She knew about the split-second decision that had saved her wingman's life, the way she had deliberately steered her failing aircraft away from Lieutenant Bradley's F-16, as both jets fought for the same airspace. She knew about the hydraulic leak that hadn't been documented in the pre-flight inspection, the way the controls had gone slack in her hands, just as she tried to execute the emergency landing procedure. None of that mattered now. What mattered was the outcome, a 28-year-old pilot with a titanium rod in her right leg, nerve damage in her left shoulder, and a psychological evaluation that used words like diminished confidence and post-traumatic stress response. Base had found her a position, of course. The Air Force took care of its own, even the broken ones. Sarah now worked in the operations planning office, a cramped collection of cubicles and conference rooms, tucked into the basement of the main command building. Her job title was Mission Support Specialist, which sounded official enough but translated to endless hours of filing flight plans, updating weather reports, and managing the logistics that kept other pilots in the air. Her supervisor, Major Robert Chun, was a decent man who had never flown combat missions but understood the delicate balance of managing personnel who had been reassigned for medical reasons. He gave Sarah meaningful work when he could, stayed out of her way when she needed space, and never once mentioned the crash or asked how she was holding up. The other staff members were a mixture of administrative personnel, retired pilots on second careers, and medical transfers like herself. There was Sergeant Patricia Williams, who had lost partial hearing in a training accident and now managed communications logs with meticulous precision. Technical Sergeant James Rodriguez had been grounded after a back injury during a cargo loading incident and had become the office's unofficial expert on weather pattern analysis. They worked in quiet efficiency, these forgotten members of the Air Force hierarchy. Their contributions were essential but invisible, the kind of behind-the-scenes work that kept the base operational, but never appeared in mission reports or commendation ceremonies. Sarah had initially resented the assignment, seeing it as exile from the cockpit she had worked her entire career to reach. But as weeks turned to months, she began to appreciate the complexity of the operations she now supported. The flight planning process was intricate, beyond anything she had understood. As a pilot, weather patterns had to be analyzed not just for current conditions, but for forecasted changes that could affect missions hours into the future. Flight paths required constant adjustment for air traffic control, restricted airspace, and the complex choreography of multiple aircraft operating in the same region. Fuel calculations involved dozens of variables, from aircraft weight and configuration to wind patterns and alternate landing sites. Sarah threw herself into the work with the same intensity she had once brought to flying. She studied meteorology textbooks during her lunch breaks, learned to read satellite imagery with the precision of a professional forecaster, and developed an almost intuitive understanding of how weather systems moved across the Western United States. Her cubicle became cluttered with charts, reference manuals, and printouts of atmospheric pressure readings that she updated hourly. The other pilots noticed her dedication, but not in the way she had hoped. To them, her intensity seemed desperate, the frantic efforts of someone trying to prove she still belonged in a world that had moved on without her. They were polite but distant, speaking to her with the careful courtesy reserved for people who had been permanently diminished by circumstance. Lieutenant Colonel Barbara Hayes, the operations planning officer, had been Sarah's flight instructor during her early years at the base. She was a career officer with over 20 years of service, someone who had broken barriers as one of the first women to fly F-16s in combat. Her office walls were covered with photographs from deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, commendations for distinguished service, and group photos of pilots who had served under her command. When Sarah had first been assigned to the planning office, Colonel Hayes had pulled her aside for a private conversation. "This doesn't have to be the end of your story," she had said, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had faced similar challenges. "There are other ways to serve, other ways to contribute. The question is whether you can find meaning in work that doesn't put you in a cockpit." Sarah had nodded at the time, but privately she had rejected the colonel's perspective. She wasn't looking for other ways to serve. She was looking for a way back to the sky, back to the precision and freedom and purpose that had defined her identity since childhood. The planning office was temporary, a way station while she recovered and proved her fitness for flight status. At least, that's what she told herself during the long hours of filing reports and updating databases. The medical evaluations continued every 6 weeks, each one a formal review of her progress toward flight readiness. The doctors measured her reflexes, tested her coordination, and asked carefully worded questions about her mental state. The physical therapy sessions were grueling, designed to restore strength and flexibility to her injured leg and shoulder. Sarah approached each appointment with methodical preparation, documenting her improvement and building a case for her return to active flight status. But the evaluations became routine, predictable in their outcomes. The doctors spoke of continued healing, of gradual progress, of the need for patience and realistic expectations. They never explicitly said she would never fly again, but their carefully neutral language conveyed the message clearly enough. Sarah was improving, but not at the rate required for fighter pilot certification. Her reflexes were acceptable, but not exceptional. Her physical conditioning was adequate, but not optimal. The psychological evaluations were more complex. Dr. Elizabeth Foster, the base's chief flight surgeon, had been conducting these assessments for over a decade. She was skilled at reading the subtle signs of pilots struggling with the transition from active duty to grounded status. Her questions were probing, but not invasive, designed to assess both Sarah's mental fitness and her ability to accept the limitations imposed by her injuries. "How are you sleeping?" Dr. Foster would ask during their sessions. "Any recurring dreams about flying?" "How do you feel when you hear jets taking off from the base?" Sarah answered honestly but strategically, acknowledging the difficulties while emphasizing her resilience and determination. She spoke of her commitment to recovery, her satisfaction with her current assignment, and her understanding that returning to flight status would require meeting the highest standards of physical and mental fitness. But privately, she struggled with questions that had no clear answers. What did it mean to be a pilot who could no longer fly? How did someone rebuild an identity that had been so completely tied to a single skill, a single purpose? The other grounded pilots in the office seemed to have found peace with their transitions, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that accepting her current situation meant giving up on the person she had always been. The base continued its daily rhythms around her. Fighter jets roared overhead during training exercises, their engines creating a constant soundtrack to her administrative work. Pilots gathered in the officers' club after missions, sharing stories and planning weekend flights to air shows and civilian airports. The bulletin boards in the squadron-ready rooms were covered with photographs from recent deployments, updates on upcoming training exercises, and announcements of promotions and transfers. Sarah remained connected to this world, but separate from it, like someone watching through a window that could never be opened. She knew the names of the new pilots arriving for training, understood the strategic importance of the exercises being conducted, and could predict weather patterns that would affect flight operations better than most of the active pilots. But she was no longer part of the fundamental activity that defined the base's existence. The loneliness was profound but rarely acknowledged. Sarah had learned to navigate social situations with careful precision, participating in conversations without revealing the depth of her isolation. She attended mandatory social events, contributed to office discussions about base policies and procedures, and maintained professional relationships with her colleagues. But the easy camaraderie she had once shared with fellow pilots was gone, replaced by polite distance and the unspoken acknowledgement that she now belonged to a different category of personnel. Her small apartment off base became a refuge where she could drop the professional mask and confront the reality of her situation. The walls were covered with photographs from her flying career formation shots with her old squadron, pictures from training exercises, commendations for outstanding performance. She had considered taking them down, but they remained as reminders of what she had accomplished and what she had lost. The evenings were the hardest. With the structured demands of work behind her, Sarah found herself alone with thoughts that circled endlessly around the same questions. Would she ever fly again? Was she wasting time in the planning office when she should be pursuing other career options? Had the crash fundamentally changed who she was, or was she still the same person trapped in circumstances beyond her control? She began taking long walks around the base perimeter, following the chain-link fence that separated the military installation from the civilian world beyond. The exercise helped with her physical therapy, but more importantly, it gave her time to think without the constant reminders of her changed status. During these walks, she could hear the jets taking off and landing, their engines echoing across the desert landscape like distant thunder. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sometimes she would stop at the fence and watch the aircraft through the diamond-shaped gaps in the chain link. The F-16s moved with mechanical precision, their pilots invisible behind dark canopies, their missions unknown to someone who no longer held the security clearances required for operational briefings. Sarah knew the aircraft specifications, understood the capabilities and limitations of each model, and could predict their flight characteristics based on weather conditions and payload configurations. But she was no longer part of the community that flew them. The base's annual air show provided the cruelest reminder of her changed circumstances. For 3 days, the installation opened its gates to the public. transforming the normally secure facility into a celebration of military aviation. Static displays showcased the base's aircraft. Demonstration flights highlighted pilot skills and aircraft capabilities, and thousands of civilians toured facilities normally off-limits to outsiders. Sarah worked the event as part of her administrative duties, coordinating logistics and managing the complex scheduling required to accommodate both the air show and ongoing training operations. She watched from the ground as her former squadron mates performed precision maneuvers, their F-16s dancing through the sky with the grace and power that had once defined her own flying. The crowd applauded each demonstration. Children pointed at the aircraft with wide-eyed wonder, and photographers captured images that would appear in newspapers and magazines across the country. But for Sarah, the air show was a reminder of everything she had lost. She stood in the heat and dust of the flight line, wearing her service uniform and answering questions from visitors about aircraft specifications and pilot training requirements. She smiled appropriately, provided accurate information, and represented the Air Force with the professionalism expected of someone in her position. But inside, she felt like a ghost haunting her own former life. The months accumulated slowly, each one bringing small improvements in her physical condition, but no meaningful change in her official status. Sarah's medical file grew thicker with evaluation reports, therapy notes, and fitness assessments. Her work performance ratings remained excellent, her attendance was perfect, and her colleagues respected her dedication and expertise. But she remained fundamentally where she had started, a pilot who could no longer fly, a warrior relegated to support duties, a professional defined by what she could no longer do rather than what she continued to accomplish. The whispers never entirely stopped. In the corridors of the squadron buildings, in the informal gatherings at the officers' club, in the brief conversations that occurred when pilots thought she was out of earshot, Sarah's name was still associated with the crash, with the investigation report, with the cautionary tale of a career ended by a moment of failure. The details became distorted through repetition, the facts simplified into a narrative that served the psychological needs of active pilots who needed to believe that such things happened to others, not to them. But Sarah Mitchell continued to show up for work each morning, continued to excel at tasks that no one else wanted to do, and continued to prepare for an opportunity that might never come. She had been called broken, damaged, finished. She had been written off by the medical establishment, dismissed by her former peers, and relegated to a position that felt more like exile than employment. What none of them knew was that Sarah had been using her time in the planning office to develop skills that no other pilot on the base possessed. What they couldn't see was the depth of her understanding of weather systems, navigation challenges, and emergency procedures. What they failed to recognize was that being grounded had given her a perspective on flying that she had never possessed. While she was in the cockpit, the base was about to face a crisis that would require exactly the kind of knowledge Sarah had been quietly accumulating. And when that moment arrived, the woman they called broken would prove that sometimes the most dangerous assumption is believing that someone who has fallen can never rise again. What the base didn't know was that Sarah Mitchell had been conducting her own private training program for the past 6 months. While her colleagues saw her as conscientiously fulfilling administrative duties, Sarah had been systematically acquiring knowledge and skills that went far beyond the requirements of her position. It started with the weather station visits. Every morning at 05:00 hours, before the official duty day began, Sarah would walk to the base meteorology office. The building was old, constructed in the 1960s with thick concrete walls and small windows that kept the interior cool even during the scorching Nevada summers. Inside, banks of monitors displayed real-time weather data from across the western United States, their screens flickering with satellite imagery, radar patterns, and atmospheric pressure readings. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos was the lead meteorologist. a 20-year veteran who had developed an almost supernatural ability to predict weather patterns. She arrived at the office every morning at 0430 hours, 2 hours before her official shift began, to study the overnight developments in atmospheric conditions. When Sarah first appeared at the meteorology office door, Santos had been suspicious of the grounded pilot's motives. "You're not supposed to be here," Santos had said during their first encounter. "This is a restricted area for essential personnel only." Sarah had explained that she was working on improving weather briefings for the pilots in her planning office, that she wanted to understand the source data better to provide more accurate forecasts. It was partially true, but not the complete explanation. Santos had grudgingly allowed her to observe, setting strict boundaries about what she could and couldn't touch. Over the following weeks, Sarah's presence became routine. She would arrive at exactly 0500 hours, carrying a thermos of coffee and a notebook with lined pages. She never spoke unless Santos initiated conversation, never interrupted the sergeant's work, and always left by 0630 hours to allow time for her regular duties. But she absorbed everything, the way Santos analyzed wind patterns, how she interpreted cloud formation data, the subtle signs that indicated weather systems were strengthening or weakening. Santos began to notice Sarah's understanding deepening. The questions she asked became more sophisticated, her observations more accurate. During a particularly complex weather system in late spring, Sarah had quietly pointed out a pressure gradient that Santos had missed, a detail that would have affected flight operations for the entire afternoon. "You're learning faster than most of the pilots I brief," Santos had commented, her tone carrying grudging respect. "Where did you study meteorology?" Sarah had smiled. "Here, every morning for the past 3 months." The relationship evolved into something resembling mentorship. Santos began explaining the theoretical principles behind weather prediction, the mathematical models used to forecast atmospheric changes, and the practical techniques for interpreting satellite data. Sarah discovered that meteorology was far more complex than she had understood as a pilot, requiring knowledge of physics, mathematics, and atmospheric science that went well beyond basic flight weather briefings. She requested access to the base library's technical collection, spending her lunch breaks studying advanced meteorology textbooks. The librarian, a retired Air Force colonel named Thomas Burke, had initially been puzzled by Sarah's intense interest in atmospheric science. But when she explained her work in the planning office, he enthusiastically supported her research, recommending specialized texts and helping her access online databases. Sarah's cubicle in the planning office became a secondary meteorology center. She installed additional monitors at her own expense, connecting them to weather databases that provided more detailed information than the standard briefing materials. Her desk was covered with reference charts, pressure tables, and handwritten notes that tracked weather patterns across the region. Major Chen noticed the changes in Sarah's work product. Her weather briefings became more detailed and accurate, her flight planning recommendations more sophisticated. She began identifying potential weather hazards hours before they appeared on official forecasts, allowing the base to adjust training schedules and avoid dangerous conditions. "Where are you getting this information?" Chun asked during one of their weekly meetings. "Your weather analysis is more accurate than what we're receiving from the National Weather Service." Sarah explained her morning routine, her independent study, and her collaboration with Sergeant Santos. Chun listened with growing interest, recognizing that Sarah had developed expertise that extended well beyond her official job responsibilities. "Have you considered applying for advanced meteorology training?" Chun suggested. "The Air Force has programs for officers who want to specialize in weather operations." Sarah had considered it, but meteorology felt like settling for a consolation prize. She wasn't interested in becoming a weather officer. She wanted to return to flying. But the knowledge she was gaining might prove useful in demonstrating her fitness for flight status. her commitment to continuous improvement, and her understanding of the environmental factors that affected aviation operations. The evening hours became Sarah's time for flight simulation. The base had a collection of older flight simulators in a building near the main hangar, equipment that was used primarily for basic training and proficiency maintenance. The simulators were outdated, their graphics primitive compared to modern training systems, but they provided realistic controls and flight dynamics. Sarah had quietly obtained permission to use the simulators during off-duty hours, ostensibly for maintaining her basic flight skills while she recovered from her injuries. The supervising technician, Airman First Class David Park, was a computer specialist who had been assigned to maintain the aging systems. He was initially skeptical of Sarah's request, concerned that a pilot with her medical restrictions might not be authorized to operate the equipment. But Sarah had done her research. The regulations allowed grounded pilots to use simulators for proficiency training, provided they had medical clearance for the activity. Her physical therapy had progressed to the point where she could operate the controls without difficulty, and her doctors had approved simulator training as beneficial. For her recovery, Park became fascinated by Sarah's approach to simulation training. Unlike other pilots who used the simulators for basic proficiency checks, Sarah created complex scenarios that pushed the equipment to its limits. She programmed extreme weather conditions, multiple system failures, and emergency situations that required split-second decision-making. "You're running scenarios that most pilots never encounter," Park observed during one of their sessions. "These are conditions that would ground aircraft in real life." Sarah nodded. "That's exactly why I need to practice with them. If I'm going to return to flying, I need to be better than I was before the crash." She had developed a systematic training program that addressed every aspect of flight operations. Weather flying occupied most of her simulator time as she practiced, navigating through conditions that ranged from challenging to impossible. She learned to read weather patterns through instrument data alone, to anticipate turbulence and wind shear, and to make real-time decisions about flight path adjustments. The simulator sessions revealed capabilities that Sarah hadn't known she possessed. Her weather knowledge enhanced her ability to interpret atmospheric conditions, while her understanding of flight planning improved her navigation accuracy. She could predict weather changes before they appeared on the simulator's weather radar, allowing her to adjust course and altitude with remarkable precision. Park began staying late to observe Sarah's sessions, intrigued by her unconventional techniques. "You're flying differently than you did before," he commented. "More conservative but also more precise." Sarah understood what he meant. The crash had taught her about the consequences of overconfidence, about the importance of maintaining safety margins and preparing for unexpected situations. But it had also given her a deeper appreciation for the complexity of flight operations, the interconnected systems that kept aircraft safely in the sky. Her injured leg had healed sufficiently to operate the simulator's rudder pedals, though she still experienced stiffness during long sessions. The nerve damage in her shoulder created occasional numbness in her left arm, but she had developed techniques for managing the limitation. Physical therapy had become part of her daily routine, exercises designed to maintain strength and flexibility, while gradually improving her range of motion. Dr. Foster had been monitoring Sarah's progress through regular evaluations, noting improvements in her physical condition and psychological adaptation. The doctor recognized that Sarah's simulator training and meteorology studies were positive signs, indicating her continued commitment to aviation and her proactive approach to recovery. "Your test scores are improving," Dr. Foster observed during one of their sessions. "Reaction time, coordination, decision-making, all trending in the right direction." Sarah felt encouraged by the feedback, but she also understood the gap between improvement and flight certification. The standards for fighter pilot medical clearance were exceptionally high, requiring not just adequate performance, but optimal function across all measured parameters. The other pilots on the base remained largely unaware of Sarah's intensive training program. They saw her arriving early and staying late, but assumed she was simply dedicated to her administrative duties. Her simulator sessions occurred during evening hours when most personnel were off duty, and her weather studies were conducted before the normal duty day began. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes occasionally encountered Sarah during her early morning walks to the meteorology office. The colonel was an early riser herself, preferring to begin her day with a review of overnight intelligence reports and weather developments. She had begun to notice Sarah's routine, the purposeful way she moved through the pre-dawn darkness toward the weather station. "You're becoming quite the weather expert," Hayes commented during one of their chance encounters. "Sergeant Santa speaks very highly of your knowledge." Sarah appreciated the recognition, but she was careful not to reveal the full extent of her training program. "I'm trying to improve the weather briefings for the pilots," she explained. "Better information leads to better decisions." Hayes nodded approvingly. "That's the kind of thinking that makes a good officer. Not everyone would invest so much personal time in improving their work product." The colonel's comments stayed with Sarah as she continued her morning routine. She was investing personal time, but not necessarily in improving her current work. Everything she was learning, every skill she was developing, was preparation for returning to the cockpit. The weather knowledge, the simulator training, the physical therapy, all of it was building toward the moment when she would be medically cleared to fly again. That moment seemed both inevitable and impossibly distant. Sarah's medical evaluations showed steady improvement, but at a pace that suggested months or even years before she might be considered for flight status. Her physical limitations were manageable but still significant. Her psychological recovery was progressing but incomplete. The base's training operations continued around her, a constant reminder of the world she had been separated from. New pilots arrived for advanced training, experienced aviators rotated through for specialized courses, and the daily rhythm of flight operations provided a soundtrack to her administrative work. Sarah could identify aircraft types by their engine sounds, predict weather delays before they were officially announced, and understand the tactical implications of the training exercises being conducted. But she remained an observer, someone who understood the system but was no longer truly part of it. The knowledge she was accumulating, the skills she was developing, the capability she was building, all of it was theoretical until she could return to actual flight operations. Irony wasn't lost on her. In many ways, Sarah was becoming a more knowledgeable and skilled pilot than she had been before the crash. Her understanding of weather, navigation, and emergency procedures exceeded that of most active pilots. Her simulator performance was improving to levels that surpassed her pre-crash abilities. Her physical condition, while still limited, was approaching the standards required for flight certification. But none of that mattered without official medical clearance, without the formal recognition that she was fit to return to flight status. And that recognition seemed to recede further into the future with each passing evaluation, each carefully worded medical report that acknowledged progress while avoiding any commitment to timelines or outcomes. Sarah continued her private training program because she had no alternative. Giving up would mean accepting that her flying career was over, that the crash had permanently altered her identity and capabilities. But persistence offered the possibility, however remote, that she might someday return to the cockpit with skills and knowledge that exceeded anything she had possessed before. What she didn't know was that her months of intensive preparation were about to become relevant in ways she couldn't imagine. The base was approaching a crisis that would require exactly the combination of weather expertise, flight skills, and determination that Sarah had been quietly developing. And when that moment arrived, the woman everyone called broken would discover that sometimes the most valuable capabilities are those developed in darkness, refined through solitude, And proven when everything else has failed. The distress signal came in at 14:37 hours on a Tuesday afternoon, crackling through the base communications center with the urgency that made every operator freeze at their console. Flight instructor Captain Marcus Webb was down somewhere in the Sierra Nevada mountains, his T-38 Talon trainer, aircraft missing after what should have been a routine navigation exercise with a student pilot. Mayday, mayday, mayday. Whitman Tower, this is Falcon 27. We have complete electrical failure, no navigation, no radio. Last known position approximately 40 miles northwest of base. We are attempting emergency landing. Repeat, Falcon 27 going down. The transmission cut to static, then silence. The radar contact had disappeared from screens at 14:35 hours, somewhere over the mountainous terrain that stretched toward the California border. Weather conditions in the area were deteriorating rapidly, with a Pacific storm system moving inland faster than predicted. Within minutes, the base's emergency response procedures activated. Alarms sounded across the installation as personnel rushed to their crisis stations. The Search and Rescue Coordination Center became a hub of controlled chaos with officers coordinating multiple agencies and resources. The Nevada Air National Guard was notified, civilian rescue teams were placed on standby, and the base's own rescue helicopter crew began preparing for immediate launch. Sarah heard the alarms from her cubicle in the planning office. The sound was distinctive, 3 long blasts followed by a brief pause, repeated continuously. It was the signal for a major aircraft emergency, the kind of situation that transformed the base from routine training operations into life or death. Rescue Coordination. Major Chun appeared at her desk within minutes, his expression grim. We need everything you can give us on weather conditions in the northwest sector. The rescue helicopter needs to know what they're flying into. Sarah was already pulling up weather data on her monitors, her fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. The information that appeared on her screens was more detailed than the standard briefing materials, layered with the specialized analysis she had been developing over the past months. The storm system is moving faster than forecast, she reported. Ceiling dropping to 2,000 feet in the valleys. Winds gusting to 45 knots above 8,000 feet. Visibility deteriorating rapidly. Shun studied the data with growing concern. How long before conditions become impossible for helicopter operations? Sarah cross-referenced the current readings with her mountain weather profiles, the specialized forecast she had created for exactly this type of scenario. 2 hours maximum, maybe less if the storm accelerates. The Search and Rescue Coordination Center had been established in a large conference room adjacent to the base operations center. Maps covered the walls, showing the terrain where the aircraft had disappeared. Radio operators maintained contact with multiple agencies, while intelligence officers analyzed the last known position and probable crash sites. Colonel Hayes commanded the rescue operation, coordinating resources from her position at the center of the room. Chief Warrant Officer Martinez and her helicopter crew were conducting final preparations, checking equipment and weather conditions. The rescue window was narrow and closing rapidly. Weather brief, Hayes called out as Sarah entered the coordination center. What are we looking at? Sarah approached the main display screen, connecting her laptop to project her specialized weather analysis. The image that appeared was more comprehensive than anything the rescue team had seen before, a 3-dimensional model of the storm system overlaid with terrain features, wind patterns, and visibility projections. Current conditions in the search area are marginal but flyable, Sarah began. Ceiling at 3,500 feet, visibility 3 miles in light rain. But there's a secondary system moving in from the west that will make helicopter operations impossible. Within 90 minutes, she manipulated the display to show the projected changes. By 16 o'clock hours, ceiling will be below 1,000 feet. Visibility less than half a mile, with severe turbulence above 6,000 feet. The window for rescue operations is closing fast. Martinez studied the projection with professional interest. This is more detailed than our standard weather briefing. How accurate is this forecast? Sarah hesitated, knowing that her analysis was based on unauthorized research and unofficial methods. I've been tracking mountain weather patterns for several months. The model uses data from multiple sources, including satellite imagery and pressure readings from remote stations. Hayes intervened. The source doesn't matter if the information is accurate. What's your confidence level? High confidence through 17 o'clock hours, Sarah replied. The storm system is following predicted patterns, moving at consistent speed. If we don't get aircraft into the area within the next hour, we'll be looking at a ground rescue operation that could take days. The implications were sobering. Captain Webb and his student pilot could survive a crash landing, but they would be exposed to severe weather conditions in terrain that was difficult to reach on foot. Mountain rescue teams would require favorable weather to even begin ground operations, and that might not occur for several days. Martinez made the decision that everyone knew was inevitable. We launch in 20 minutes. I need detailed weather updates every 15 minutes once we're airborne. Hayes nodded agreement. Sarah, you're assigned to weather support for this operation. I need real-time updates on conditions in the search area. Sarah felt a mixture of anticipation and concern. This was the opportunity she had been preparing for, the chance to use her specialized knowledge in a real emergency. But she also understood the stakes. 2 lives depended on the accuracy of her weather analysis and the decisions made based on her information. The rescue helicopter, a UH-60 Black Hawk configured for mountain operations, sat on the flight line surrounded by ground crew making final preparations. The aircraft was equipped with specialized rescue equipment, medical supplies, and navigation systems designed for operations in challenging terrain. Martinez and her co-pilot, Captain James Rodriguez, conducted their pre-flight inspection with methodical precision. Sarah established her weather monitoring station in the coordination center, surrounded by multiple screens displaying real-time data from across the region. Her setup was more sophisticated than the standard weather briefing equipment, incorporating feeds from civilian meteorological services, military weather stations, and her own analysis software. The first updates came within minutes of the helicopter's departure. Conditions in the search area were holding steady, but the approaching storm system was accelerating. Sarah tracked the weather changes with growing urgency, updating her forecasts as new data became available. Rescue 1, this is base weather, Sarah transmitted. Current conditions in search area, ceiling 3,200 feet, visibility 2.5 miles, winds from 270 degrees at 25 knots gusting to 35. A storm system approaching from the west. Estimated arrival in the search area 15:45 hours. Martinez's voice came back through the radio with professional calm. Copy, base weather. We're encountering moderate turbulence at 6,000 feet, visibility decreasing as we approach the mountains. Sarah monitored the helicopter's progress on radar, while simultaneously tracking weather developments. The storm system was moving faster than her initial forecast, driven by upper-level winds that were stronger than predicted. She recalculated the arrival time, her concern growing as the numbers changed. Rescue 1, updated weather forecast. Storm system is accelerating, now estimated to reach the search area at 15:30 hours. Recommend expediting search operations. The response was immediate. Copy, base weather. We're increasing speed to maximum cruise. ETA search area in 12 minutes. In the coordination center, tension was building as multiple factors converged. The Civil Air Patrol had launched additional search aircraft, but they would be forced to return to base as weather conditions deteriorated. Ground rescue teams were moving toward the area, but they were hours away from reaching the probable crash site. The helicopter crew represented the only realistic chance of locating and rescuing the survivors before the storm made operations impossible. Sarah's weather analysis showed the storm system developing with unusual intensity. The combination of Pacific moisture and mountain terrain was creating conditions that exceeded the forecast models. She found herself making real-time adjustments to her predictions, incorporating observational data from the rescue helicopter and ground stations. "This storm is stronger than predicted," she reported to Colonel Hayes. "We may have less time than originally calculated." Hayes studied the updated weather display with growing concern. How much less time? Sarah ran the calculations again, incorporating the latest atmospheric pressure readings and wind velocity data. 45 minutes maximum before helicopter operations become impossible. Maybe 30 minutes if the storm continues to intensify. The Colonel made the decision that operational commanders dread. "Martinez, you have 30 minutes to locate the crash site and assess the situation. If you can't complete the rescue in that time frame, you'll need to return to base and wait for the storm to pass." Martinez's acknowledgement was terse. "Understood. Base will find them." Sarah continued monitoring weather conditions as the rescue helicopter approached the search area. Her screens showed the storm system's leading edge moving across the mountains like a dark curtain, obscuring peaks and valleys in clouds and precipitation. The weather station readings were deteriorating rapidly, with visibility dropping and wind speeds increasing. Rescue 1. Be advised, visibility in the search area is now less than 2 miles and decreasing. Recommend staying below 4,000 feet to maintain visual contact with terrain. The helicopter crew was flying in conditions that would challenge even experienced mountain pilots. The terrain was unforgiving, with narrow valleys, steep ridges, and obstacles that could appear suddenly through the clouds. Navigation required constant attention, with landmarks disappearing and reappearing as visibility fluctuated. Sarah's role had evolved from weather analyst to operational coordinator. She was providing real-time updates that directly affected the helicopter crew's decisions about altitude, heading, and search patterns. Her specialized knowledge of mountain weather was proving essential for maintaining safe operations in rapidly deteriorating conditions. The breakthrough came at 15:28 hours. "Base, this is Rescue 1. We have visual contact with the crash site. Aircraft is down in a valley, approximately 42 miles northwest of base. We can see movement near the wreckage." The coordination center erupted in controlled excitement. After nearly an hour of uncertainty, the missing pilots had been located and appeared to be alive. But the rescue operation was just beginning, and weather conditions were continuing to deteriorate. "Rescue 1, what's your assessment of the situation?" Hayes asked. Martinez's voice was tense but professional. "Aircraft is severely damaged, but not burning. We can see 2 individuals near the wreckage. Both appear to be mobile. The valley is narrow, but we can attempt a landing about 200 meters from the crash site." Sarah monitored the weather data with a growing alarm. The storm system was moving even faster than her updated forecasts had predicted. "Rescue 1, be advised, weather conditions are deteriorating rapidly. You have approximately 20 minutes before the area becomes unsafe for helicopter operations." The race against time had begun. The helicopter crew had to land in challenging terrain, reach the crash survivors, provide medical assistance, and evacuate them before the storm made flight operations impossible. Any delay could trap all 4 individuals in the mountains until the weather cleared, which might not occur for days. Sarah's weather analysis had brought the rescue operation to this critical moment. Her specialized knowledge had identified the narrow window of opportunity. Her real-time updates had guided the helicopter crew to the crash site, and her continued monitoring would determine whether the rescue could be completed successfully But now the operation was entering its most dangerous phase. The helicopter crew would be operating at the limits of their aircraft's capabilities, in terrain that offered no margin for error, with weather conditions that were deteriorating by the minute. Sarah's role was about to become even more critical, as she provided the information that would determine whether the rescue mission succeeded or became a tragedy that claimed 4 lives instead of saving 2. The storm was racing toward the mountains, and time was running out. The radio transmission that changed everything came at 15:42 hours, crackling through the coordination center with the kind of urgency that made everyone freeze mid-sentence. "Base, this is Rescue 1. We have a problem." Chief Warrant Officer Martinez's voice was strained, carrying the weight of a situation spiraling beyond control. Through the static, the sound of rotor blades struggling against mountain winds was clearly audible, accompanied by the sharp whistle of air rushing through the aircraft's open doors. "Go ahead, Rescue 1, Colonel Hayes responded, her knuckles white as she gripped the radio handset. "We've got both survivors loaded, but Captain Webb has severe internal injuries. He's lost consciousness and needs immediate medical attention. We're experiencing severe turbulence and icing conditions. The weather is worse than forecast." Sarah's eyes were fixed on her weather display, watching the storm system's progression in real time. The data showed conditions deteriorating faster than even her most pessimistic projections had predicted. Wind speeds were gusting to 60 knots, visibility had dropped to less than a quarter mile, and the ceiling was collapsing toward the valley. "Floor, Rescue 1, current conditions at base are 800-foot ceiling, visibility 1 mile in heavy rain. Can you maintain visual flight rules for return?" There was a pause before Martinez responded, and when she did, her voice carried the weight of a pilot facing impossible choices. "Negative, base. We're in solid cloud cover at 5,000 feet. No visual references. GPS is intermittent due to terrain masking. And we're picking up ice on the rotors." The coordination center fell silent except for the hum of electronic equipment and the distant sound of rain against the windows. Everyone understood the implications. The helicopter was flying blind in conditions that could kill them all within minutes. Ice accumulation on the rotor blades would eventually make the aircraft unflyable, while the combination of turbulence and reduced visibility made navigation through the mountains a deadly gamble. Sarah studied her weather analysis with a growing alarm. The storm system had developed an unexpected intensity, feeding on moisture from the Pacific and energy from the temperature differential created by the mountain terrain. Her forecasts had been accurate for the initial conditions, but the storm was now behaving like a living thing, growing stronger and more dangerous by the minute. "Martinez, what's your fuel status?" Hayes asked, her voice steady despite the crisis. "We've got maybe 40 minutes remaining. But if we can't find a way through this weather, fuel won't matter." Sarah's mind raced through the meteorological data, searching for any pattern that might offer a solution. Her months of studying mountain weather had taught her that storms often created their own microenvironments, with pockets of relatively clear air that could be exploited by skilled pilots. But finding those pockets required intimate knowledge of how weather systems interacted with terrain features. She pulled up a 3-dimensional model of the storm system, overlaying it with topographical data and wind flow patterns. The display showed the storm structure in unprecedented detail, revealing the complex interaction between the weather system and the mountain terrain. Most importantly, it showed something that hadn't been visible in the standard weather briefings. "Colonel Hayes," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the tension in the coordination center. "I think I found something." Hayes turned to her with desperate hope. "What do you have?" Sarah manipulated the display to highlight a narrow corridor of relatively clear air that extended from the mountains toward the base. "The storm system is creating a Venturi effect through Murphy's Pass. The wind is being funneled between the peaks. creating an area of reduced turbulence and better visibility. She traced the path on the screen with her finger. If the helicopter can navigate to these coordinates and follow the path southeast, they should encounter improving conditions within 10 minutes. But the window is narrow, maybe 200 meters wide, and it's moving as the storm shifts. Hayes studied the display intently. How confident are you in this analysis? Sarah hesitated, knowing that 4 lives hung on her answer. The meteorological principles are sound, and the satellite data supports the theory. But this isn't a standard weather phenomenon. I've never seen it documented in any manual. The colonel made the decision that defined her career. Martinez, we're going to vector you through Murphy's Pass. Sarah Mitchell will provide navigation. Guidance. The response was immediate. Who's Sarah Mitchell? She's the weather analyst who's been tracking this storm. She knows these mountains better than anyone. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a physical presence. Her months of unofficial training, her specialized knowledge of mountain weather, her understanding of how atmospheric systems behaved in complex terrain, all of it was about to be tested in the most demanding circumstances possible. Rescue 1, this is base weather control, Sarah transmitted, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the situation. Turn to heading 145 degrees and begin descent to 4,500 feet. You'll be flying toward Murphy's Pass. Copy, base weather control. Turning to 145 degrees, beginning descent. But I need to know, what's your experience with helicopter operations in these conditions? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah could have explained about her simulator training, her study of helicopter flight characteristics, her analysis of rescue operations. Instead, she chose honesty. I've never flown helicopters operationally. But I've spent 8 months studying how weather affects aircraft in these mountains. I know where the air is flyable. Martinez's response was immediate. That's either the most honest thing I've ever heard from a weather officer, or you're about to kill us all. I'm going to get you home, Sarah replied, her voice carrying a confidence she didn't entirely feel. The next 20 minutes represented the most intense flying and weather analysis of either woman's career. Sarah guided the helicopter through the storm using real-time weather data and her understanding of mountain atmospheric dynamics. She called out heading changes, altitude adjustments, and warnings about turbulence with the precision of someone who had flown the route herself. Rescue 1, turn right to heading 160 degrees. You're approaching a wind shear zone. Maintain 4,200 feet until you clear the ridgeline. Martinez's voice came back tight with concentration. Roger, turning right to 160. I can see some breaks in the clouds ahead. Visibility is improving slightly. Sarah monitored the helicopter's progress on radar, while simultaneously tracking the storm's movement. The Venturi effect she had identified was holding, creating a relatively stable corridor of flyable air through the pass. But the window was narrow, and any deviation from the prescribed path could put the aircraft back into the heart of the storm. Base weather control, we're through the pass. Visibility is 3 miles and improving. I can see the valley floor. The coordination center erupted in controlled celebration, but Sarah remained focused on her displays. The helicopter was through the most dangerous section, but they still had to navigate the remaining distance to the base while carrying a critically injured patient who needed immediate medical attention. Rescue 1, continue southeast toward the base. Weather conditions are improving along your route, but you'll encounter another line of storms in approximately 15 minutes. Sarah's analysis showed a secondary weather system approaching from the south. Less intense than the mountain storm, but still dangerous for an aircraft flying in marginal conditions. The helicopter would have to thread the needle between 2 weather systems, maintaining course and speed while dealing with turbulence and reduced visibility. Base weather control, patient is in critical condition. We need the fastest possible route to the base. Sarah made a decision that would have been impossible without her months of preparation. Rescue 1, I'm going to vector you through a gap in the southern storm system. It's untested, but it could save you 10 minutes. She manipulated her weather display to show the gap, a narrow corridor of relatively clear air between two storm cells. The passage was risky, requiring precise navigation and timing, but it offered the shortest path to the base and medical attention for Captain Webb. Roger, base weather control. We're in your hands. Sarah guided the helicopter through the gap, with instructions that came from pure instinct combined with scientific analysis. She called out course corrections based on radar returns from the storm cells, adjusted altitude recommendations based on turbulence reports, and provided constant updates on the shifting weather conditions. Rescue 1, turn left to heading 125 degrees. You're between two storm cells. Maintain current altitude and speed. Time to clear the gap is 4 minutes. The helicopter flew through the narrow corridor like a thread being pulled through the eye of a needle. Rain lashed the aircraft from both sides, turbulence bounced it up and down, and lightning illuminated the clouds with stark flashes that revealed the massive storm system surrounding them. Base weather control, we're clear of the gap. I can see the base lights ahead. Sarah felt a surge of relief that was immediately tempered by the realization that the mission wasn't over yet. The helicopter still had to land safely, and Captain Webb still needed medical attention. But the most dangerous part of the flight was behind them. Rescue 1, you're cleared for a straight-in approach to the base. The medical team is standing by. The landing was anticlimactic after the drama of the mountain rescue. The helicopter touched down on the base's medical pad with barely a bounce, its rotors still spinning as medical personnel rushed to transfer Captain Webb to the waiting ambulance. The student pilot, though shaken and bruised, was able to walk away from the aircraft under his own power. Martine shut down the helicopter's engines and climbed out of the cockpit, her flight suit soaked with sweat despite the cool mountain air. She walked directly to the coordination center, past the congratulatory comments and backslapping that followed successful rescue operations. Where's Sarah Mitchell? She asked as she entered the building. Sarah was still at her weather station, updating the storm tracking displays and preparing reports on the mission's meteorological aspects. She looked up as Martinez approached, uncertain what to expect from the pilot who had risked everything based on her analysis. That was either the best weather guidance I've ever received, or we were incredibly lucky, Martinez said. Which one was it? Sarah considered the question carefully. Probably both. The meteorological analysis was sound, but mountain weather is unpredictable. There were no guarantees, Martinez nodded. I've been flying helicopters for 12 years, including combat operations in Afghanistan. I've never attempted anything that dangerous based on weather analysis from someone who's never flown the aircraft. But you did it anyway, because you knew what you were talking about. Your instructions were precise, your timing was perfect, and your understanding of the weather was better than anything I've seen from operational meteorologists. Martinez paused, studying Sarah's weather displays. The question is, how did a grounded pilot develop this level of expertise? Sarah gestured toward the complex array of monitors and analysis equipment she had assembled. 8 months of studying mountain weather. I wanted to understand how atmospheric systems affect flight operations in this terrain. For someone who's medically restricted from flying, you seem to know a lot about how aircraft behave in challenging conditions. The comment carried implications that Sarah wasn't ready to address. Her weather guidance had been successful, but it had also revealed capabilities that exceeded her current position and medical status. She had demonstrated knowledge and skills that suggested she might be ready for responsibilities that officially remained beyond her reach. Colonel Hayes appeared at Sarah's workstation, her expression mixing relief with professional curiosity. Outstanding work, Captain Mitchell. That was some of the most precise weather guidance I've ever seen. Thank you, Colonel. I was just applying the meteorological principles I've been studying. Hayes studied the weather displays with obvious interest. These systems are more sophisticated than our standard weather briefing equipment. Where did you acquire this level of analytical capability? Sarah explained her independent study program, her collaboration with Sergeant Santos, and her efforts to understand how weather affected all aspects of flight operations. She was careful to emphasize that her activities had been within regulations and focused on improving her support capabilities. Your analysis saved 4 lives today, Hayes said. That kind of expertise doesn't develop overnight. The Colonel's comment carried weight that extended beyond the immediate mission. Sarah's performance during the rescue operation had demonstrated capabilities that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. Her weather analysis had been more accurate than official forecasts. Her understanding of helicopter operations had been more practical than theoretical. And her guidance had been more precise than anything available from standard sources. But Sarah remained officially grounded, medically restricted from the flight operations where her expertise would be most valuable. The rescue mission had revealed the gap between her actual capabilities and her official status, creating questions that would need to be addressed. What she didn't know was that her performance during the rescue operation had been observed by people who would soon be making decisions about her future. The woman they had called broken had just demonstrated that sometimes the most valuable capabilities are those developed through adversity, refined through dedication, and proven when everything else has failed. The storm was beginning to clear, and Sarah Mitchell's moment of recognition was about to begin. The debriefing room at 0800 hours. The next morning was filled with personnel who rarely occupied the same space. Base Commander Colonel Patricia Hartwell sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by representatives from the Nevada Air National Guard, the Civil Air Patrol, and the Federal Aviation Administration. The successful rescue of Captain Webb and his student pilot had attracted attention from multiple levels of command, each wanting to understand how a mission that should have been impossible had been completed without casualties. Sarah entered the room with the same measured pace she had maintained throughout her months of administrative exile. Her uniform was pressed, her bearing professional, but she could feel the weight of scrutiny from officers who had never paid attention to her before. Major Chun had briefed her on the meeting's purpose, but she understood that this was more than a routine mission debrief. Captain Mitchell, Colonel Hartwell began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fighter squadrons before taking over base operations. Your weather analysis yesterday was instrumental in saving 4 lives. I want to understand how you developed capabilities that exceeded our standard meteorological support. Sarah had prepared for this question during the sleepless hours after the rescue. She could have minimized her achievements, deflected credit to others, or presented her work as simple diligence. Instead, she chose to explain the full extent of her preparation. Ma'am, I've been conducting an independent study program for the past 8 months. My work in the planning office revealed gaps in our weather support for emergency operations, particularly mountain rescue scenarios. I began studying atmospheric dynamics specific to our regional terrain. She activated the room's display system, projecting the same 3-dimensional weather models she had used to guide the helicopter through the storm. The visualization showed the complex interaction between weather systems and mountain terrain with detail that impressed even the experienced officers present. This analysis combines data from multiple sources: satellite imagery, ground-based weather stations, atmospheric pressure readings, and predictive modeling. The system allowed me to identify the Venturi effect through Murphy's Pass and predict the gap between storm systems that provided the final approach corridor. Chief Warrant Officer Martinez, who had requested permission to attend the debriefing, leaned forward in her chair. Colonel, I've been flying rescue operations in these mountains for 8 years. I've never received weather guidance at this Level of precision. Captain Mitchell's analysis was more accurate than anything I've seen from operational meteorologists. The FAA representative, a senior investigator named Robert Chun, studied the weather displays with professional interest. Captain, this level of meteorological analysis typically requires specialized training and certification. What's your background in atmospheric science? Sarah felt the familiar weight of questions about her qualifications, but this time the context was different. Sir, I have no formal meteorological training beyond basic flight weather requirements. Everything I've learned has been through independent study and collaboration with base weather personnel. Independent study, Colonel Hartwell repeated, her tone suggesting this was more significant than Sarah had implied. Can you be more specific about the scope of your preparation? Sarah described her morning sessions with Sergeant Santos, her analysis of emergency response procedures, her study of mountain weather patterns, and her development of specialized forecasting techniques. She explained how her simulator training had given her understanding of helicopter operations, how her physical conditioning had prepared her for potential emergency response roles, and how her comprehensive approach to weather analysis had created capabilities that didn't exist elsewhere on the base. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Sarah hadn't simply stumbled onto useful information during routine administrative work. She had conducted a systematic program of professional development that had created expertise exceeding that of most specialists in the field. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, who had observed Sarah's work in the planning office, provided additional context. Captain Mitchell's performance over the past months has been exceptional. Her weather briefings have been more accurate than standard forecasts. Her mission planning has been more comprehensive than required, and her understanding of flight operations has been more sophisticated than typical for administrative personnel. Colonel Hartwell studied Sarah with renewed interest. Captain, your medical records indicate you've been grounded due to injuries sustained in a flight accident. How do those limitations affect your ability to apply this expertise operationally? The question addressed the elephant in the room, Sarah's official status as medically unfit for flight duty. Her performance during the rescue operation had demonstrated capabilities that seemed inconsistent with her medical restrictions, creating questions about whether her grounding was still appropriate. Ma'am, my physical recovery has progressed significantly since my initial evaluation. My simulator training has maintained my flight skills, and my expanded knowledge base has actually improved my operational capabilities beyond pre-accident levels. Dr. Foster, who had been quietly observing the discussion, chose this moment to contribute. Colonel, I've been monitoring Captain Mitchell's recovery for the past 8 months. Her physical condition has improved substantially, and her psychological adaptation has been exemplary. Based on yesterday's performance, I believe her medical restrictions warrant re-evaluation. The statement carried weight that extended beyond the immediate discussion. Dr. Foster was recommending that Sarah be reconsidered for flight status, a possibility that had seemed remote just days earlier. Martinez added her perspective as an operational pilot. Colonel, I've flown with weather officers, flight controllers, and rescue coordinators. Captain Mitchell's guidance yesterday was more effective than any support I've received from personnel in those specialties. Her combination of weather knowledge and flight understanding is unique. The Nevada Air National Guard representative, Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, had been reviewing documentation throughout the discussion. Captain Mitchell, your analysis identified weather patterns that weren't predicted by the National Weather Service or military meteorological services. How did you develop forecasting capabilities that exceeded professional weather organizations? Sarah explained her integration of multiple data sources, her understanding of local terrain effects, and her development of predictive models specific to mountain weather systems. She emphasized that her analysis built on existing scientific principles rather than representing revolutionary techniques. The key was understanding how weather systems interact with our specific terrain features. Standard forecasts are designed for broad regional coverage, but emergency operations require precision that accounts for local geographic effects. Morrison nodded approvingly. That kind of specialized knowledge is exactly what we need for our mountain rescue operations. Would you be interested in developing similar capabilities for our guard units? The question represented an opportunity Sarah hadn't anticipated. The Air National Guard conducted rescue operations throughout the Sierra Nevada region, facing the same weather challenges that had made yesterday's mission so dangerous. Her expertise could have applications well beyond Whitman Air Force Base. Colonel Hartwell brought the discussion back to immediate concerns. Captain Mitchell, based on your performance yesterday and the testimony I've heard today, I'm recommending you for immediate medical reevaluation and consideration for specialized assignment. Your capabilities are too valuable to waste in administrative support. The words carried implications that made Sarah's heart race. Medical reevaluation meant the possibility of returning to flight status. Specialized assignment suggested recognition that her unique combination of skills might be more valuable than standard pilot duties. Furthermore, Hartwell continued, I'm directing that you be assigned as lead weather analyst for all future mountain rescue operations. Your expertise will be integrated into our emergency response procedures. Sarah felt the weight of months of preparation and perseverance crystallizing into official recognition. The woman they had called broken was being assigned responsibilities that matched her actual capabilities rather than her medical restrictions. Martinez stood and approached Sarah with an extended hand. Captain, it's been an honor working with you. I hope this is the beginning of a long operational partnership. The handshake represented more than professional courtesy. It was recognition from a respected pilot that Sarah's contributions were valued, that her expertise was legitimate, and that her place in the aviation community was secure. Over the following days, word of Sarah's performance spread throughout the base with the speed that good news travels in military communities. The rescue operation became a case study in effective weather analysis, with Sarah's techniques being incorporated into training programs and emergency procedures. Young pilots sought her out for advice on weather flying, while senior officers consulted her on mission planning for challenging conditions. Her cubicle in the planning office became a destination for personnel who needed sophisticated weather analysis rather than a way station for someone waiting to be reassigned. The base's annual awards ceremony, held 3 weeks after the rescue, included a special recognition for Sarah's contributions. Colonel Hartwell presented her with the Air Force Commendation Medal for heroic achievement, citing her exceptional expertise and decisive action that directly resulted in the successful rescue of 4 personnel under extremely hazardous conditions. Sarah stood at attention as the citation was read, feeling the weight of recognition that had seemed impossible just months earlier. The medal was tangible proof that her contributions were valued, that her expertise was recognized, and that her place in the Air Force was secure. But the most significant recognition came from an unexpected source. Captain Webb, who had recovered from his injuries and returned to flight status, approached Sarah after the ceremony. Captain Mitchell, I wanted to thank you personally. The doctor said I wouldn't have survived another hour in the mountains. Your weather guidance made the difference between life and death. Sarah shook his hand, feeling the profound satisfaction that comes from knowing your work has saved lives. I'm just glad we could get you home safely, sir. Webb's expression grew serious. I heard about your accident, about the challenges you faced. I want you to know that what you did for us proves that adversity can make someone stronger rather than weaker. The comment captured something essential about Sarah's journey. Her crash had ended one phase of her career, but had led to capabilities she never would have developed otherwise. The months of exile had become a period of growth. The administrative assignment had become an opportunity for learning. and the medical restrictions had become motivation for excellence. Dr. Foster's medical reevaluation, conducted the week after the ceremony, confirmed what everyone already knew. Sarah's physical condition had improved to the point where flight restrictions were no longer justified. Her psychological adaptation was complete, and her enhanced capabilities made her more qualified for flight duties than she had been before the accident. "Captain Mitchell," Dr. Foster said as she signed the medical clearance forms, "you've demonstrated something I rarely see in pilots who've been grounded after accidents. Instead of being diminished by the experience, you've become stronger, more knowledgeable, and more capable." Sarah accepted the flight clearance with quiet satisfaction. The document represented more than permission to return to the cockpit. It was validation that her months of preparation had transformed her from a pilot recovering from an accident into an aviator with unique capabilities. The base's flight operations officer, Major Patricia Williams, reviewed Sarah's qualifications for return to flight status. Her simulator scores exceeded her pre-accident performance. Her weather knowledge was superior to most operational pilots, and her understanding of emergency procedures was more comprehensive than standard training provided. "Captain, I'm recommending you for assignment to our rescue operations flight. Your combination of flying skills and weather expertise makes you uniquely qualified for mountain rescue missions." The assignment represented the culmination of Sarah's journey from broken pilot to specialized expert. She would be flying again, but with responsibilities that matched her expanded capabilities rather than simply returning to her previous position. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, who had watched Sarah's transformation from administrative exile to operational recognition, provided the final perspective during their last meeting in the planning office. "Captain Mitchell, you've demonstrated something important about resilience and professional development. You could have accepted your limitations and settled for administrative duties. Instead, you used your circumstances as motivation to become better than you were before." Sarah reflected on the colonel's words as she prepared to leave the planning office for her new assignment. The cubicle that had seemed like exile now appeared as the laboratory where she had developed capabilities that made her more valuable than she had ever been. Her months of preparation had been validated in the most dramatic way possible. The weather analysis that had saved 4 lives, the expertise that had impressed senior officers, the capabilities that had earned professional recognition, all of it had emerged from the period when others had written her off as finished. Woman they had called broken had proven that sometimes the most valuable growth occurs in darkness, that the most important preparation happens when no one is watching, and that the most profound validation comes from demonstrating capabilities that no one believed were possible. Sarah Mitchell was ready to fly again, but this time with knowledge, skills, and purpose that exceeded anything she had possessed before her crash. The accident that had ended her old career had become the foundation for a new one, built on expertise that could save lives and capabilities that could make the impossible routine. The base's whispers had changed from broken bird to the pilot who saved them all. And Sarah knew that sometimes the most important victories are the ones that emerge from the deepest defeats. 2 years after the rescue that changed everything, Captain Sarah Mitchell stood before the largest gathering of rescue professionals in Air Force history. The auditorium at the National Emergency Response Training Center was packed with over 800 personnel from military and civilian organizations across North America. They had come to hear the woman whose weather analysis techniques had revolutionized mountain rescue operations and whose personal story had become a symbol of resilience in the face of overwhelming adversity. Sarah looked out at faces that represented every branch of emergency services. Coast Guard helicopter pilots who battled storms over the Pacific, Army medics who extracted wounded soldiers from hostile terrain, civilian search and rescue teams who risked their lives for strangers in distress. Many of them had used her methods to save lives, while others had come to learn from the pilot whose name had become synonymous with impossible rescues. 2 years ago, I was considered a broken pilot, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium sound system. My career was over, my confidence was shattered, and my future seemed limited to administrative duties. Today, I want to tell you how that experience became the foundation for everything I've accomplished since. The opening captured the attention of everyone present. Sarah's story was well known within rescue circles, but hearing it directly from her carried emotional weight that written reports couldn't convey. She spoke without notes, drawing from experiences that had shaped her understanding of both technical excellence and human resilience. The crash that ended my fighter pilot career lasted less than 30 seconds. The recovery that followed took 2 years of work that nobody saw, preparation that nobody required, and persistence that nobody believed would matter. But every hour I spent studying weather patterns, every night I spent in simulators, every moment I spent preparing for opportunities that might never come, all of it became essential when lives were on the line. The narrative structure she employed was deliberately crafted to inspire rather than merely inform. Sarah had discovered that her technical expertise was most effective when combined with the emotional context of her journey. Pilots learned her methods better when they understood the dedication required to develop them, while rescue personnel applied her techniques more effectively when they appreciated the circumstances that had created them. Her presentation included detailed case studies of rescues that had succeeded because of weather analysis techniques she had developed. The first was a Coast Guard operation off the California coast, where her storm tracking methods had identified a brief window of flyable conditions that allowed helicopter crews to reach sailors trapped on a sinking vessel. The second was an Army medevac mission in the Rocky Mountains, where her terrain-specific weather profiles had enabled medical helicopters to navigate through conditions that would have grounded aircraft using standard meteorological support. Each case study demonstrated the practical application of knowledge that had emerged from her months of seemingly pointless preparation. The atmospheric dynamics she had studied during her administrative exile had become the foundation for weather analysis that saved lives in situations where standard forecasting methods failed. Her understanding of how aircraft behaved in challenging conditions had enabled rescue operations that pushed the boundaries of what was considered possible. Excellence in emergency response, Sarah explained, requires understanding the relationship between preparation and opportunity. You can't predict when the crisis will come, but you can prepare for it by developing capabilities that exceed your current requirements. The message resonated with an audience that understood the importance of being ready for situations that might never occur. Emergency responders trained for scenarios they hoped never to face, developed skills they might never use, and maintained readiness for challenges that existed only in their nightmares. Sarah's story validated their commitment to preparation. That seemed excessive until it became essential. The audience included several pilots who had experienced career-threatening setbacks similar to Sarah's. Major David Rodriguez had been grounded after a training accident that left him with partial vision loss. He had used his recovery period to develop expertise in emergency medical procedures, becoming the Air Force's leading specialist in flight surgeon operations. His experience paralleled Sarah's in demonstrating how limitations could become motivations for excellence in adjacent fields. Captain Jennifer Walsh had been medically retired after a spinal injury that ended her career as a transport pilot. During her rehabilitation, she had studied logistics and supply chain management, eventually becoming the architect of the Air Force's most efficient cargo distribution system. Her story reinforced the theme that career setbacks could become setups for greater achievements when approached with the right mindset. These parallel stories created a community of professionals who had transformed adversity into advantage. Their experiences demonstrated that Sarah's journey, while unique in its specifics, reflected universal principles of resilience and professional development. The common thread was the choice to use challenging circumstances as motivation for Growth rather than reasons for limitation. Sarah's presentation addressed the psychological aspects of recovery from career-threatening setbacks. The hardest part wasn't the physical rehabilitation or the technical learning, she explained. It was maintaining belief in my own worth when everyone around me saw me as damaged goods. The medical evaluations, the whispered conversations, the assumption that my best days were behind me, all of it created an environment where giving up seemed like the reasonable response. Her honesty about the emotional challenges of recovery provided validation for others facing similar struggles. The audience included personnel dealing with medical restrictions, career transitions, and professional disappointments. Sarah's willingness to discuss the psychological aspects of her journey offered hope that their own challenges could be overcome. The turning point came when I realized that other people's opinions about my limitations were just opinions, not facts. My medical restrictions were real, but they didn't define my potential for contribution. The key was finding ways to contribute that worked within my limitations while building capabilities that exceeded them. The philosophical shift she described represented a fundamental change in perspective from focusing on what was lost to concentrating on what could be gained. Sarah's experience demonstrated that identity could be rebuilt, that expertise could be developed in unexpected circumstances, and that the most valuable contributions often came from people who refused to accept conventional definitions of their limitations. Her technical presentation included live demonstrations of the weather analysis systems she had developed. The three-dimensional visualization software showed storm systems interacting with mountain terrain in real time, revealing patterns that were invisible to standard meteorological tools. The display highlighted the Venturi effects, pressure differentials, and wind patterns that created pockets of flyable air within larger storm systems. This technology didn't exist when I started my independent study program, Sarah explained. I developed it because existing tools weren't adequate for the precision required in mountain rescue operations. The software integrates data from multiple sources to create forecasts that are accurate enough to guide aircraft through narrow corridors of safe air. The technical innovation represented more than individual achievement. It demonstrated how personal challenges could drive technological advancement. Sarah's need to prove her continued value had motivated her to develop capabilities that exceeded anything available through standard channels. Her work had created tools that were now being used by emergency response organizations worldwide. The presentation included testimonials from personnel whose lives had been saved by operations using Sarah's methods. Captain Marcus Webb, the pilot whose rescue had launched Sarah's recognition, spoke about the importance of specialized weather analysis in extreme conditions. Without Sarah's guidance, our rescue helicopter couldn't have reached us. Her weather analysis made the difference between life and death. Chief Warrant Officer Martinez, who had become Sarah's closest collaborator in rescue operations, described the evolution of their working relationship. Initially, I was skeptical of taking navigation guidance from someone who had never flown helicopters operationally. But Sarah's understanding of weather and terrain exceeded anything I had encountered. Her analysis enabled missions that I would never have attempted using standard meteorological support. The testimonials provided external validation of Sarah's expertise while demonstrating the practical impact of her work. Lives saved, missions accomplished, and capabilities developed, all of it traced back to the months when she had been written off as professionally finished. The contrast between her perceived limitations and actual contributions highlighted the danger of underestimating people based on their circumstances rather than their potential. Sarah's story had become a case study in multiple military leadership programs, taught as an example of how adversity could become advantage when approached with the right mindset. The lessons extended beyond individual resilience to include institutional responsibilities for supporting personnel through challenging transitions, Organizations have a responsibility to recognize and nurture expertise wherever it develops, Sarah told the audience. My capabilities were developed during off-duty hours, in unofficial capacities, without institutional support. But once proven, they became institutional assets that served needs nobody had recognized. Sarah's case taught us that medical limitations don't necessarily mean professional limitations. General Hartwell explained. We've changed our procedures to focus on capabilities rather than restrictions, creating opportunities for people to contribute expertise that serves institutional needs regardless of their official status. The policy changes represented systemic improvements that would benefit future personnel facing similar challenges. Sarah's individual journey had created institutional learning that would help others navigate career setbacks and professional transitions more effectively. Sarah Mitchell had proven that being called broken was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of becoming something stronger, more capable, and more valuable than anyone had imagined possible. Her legacy would continue to inspire others facing their own setbacks, their own limitations, and their own opportunities to transform adversity into advantage. The woman they had called broken had become the pilot they called irreplaceable, and in doing so, she had demonstrated that the most important victories are often the ones that emerge from the deepest defeats, achieved by people who refuse to accept what everyone else believes to be true about their limitations. Not sometimes that most valuable people are the ones who use their darkest moments to discover their brightest potential. Sarah Mitchell had done exactly that, and her story would continue to light the way for others following similar paths from adversity to achievement. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.